Come and join. Tēnā tātou katoa. Ka mihi atu ki a koutou e tēnei pō. Nau mai hari mai, ara mai ki tēnei kaupapa. Ka timatatanga tēnei kaupapa, himene me te karakia. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We're going to start off our event with a hymn. Which one have we got? It was a bit of a... I'm just waiting for the words to come up. It's a bit like karaoke, isn't it? Okay. If you're able to, please stand and then we'll get into our waiata. O mai tō wau aroha, wairua tapu tau mai rā, wairua tapu mai runga, uia mai ngā taonga pai, o mai tō aroha, wahia, wahia. Kia tika, a kona mai a kia uki te pai, oroia kia matonu rā, mō au te tino kroria. Wairua tapu tau mai rā, wairua tapu tau mai rā, wairua tapu tau mai rā. Me noi tātou. E onore e karoria ki te atua. E maunga rongo ki te wenua e wakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Āmene. Mana ki tia mai ki a mātou e ui ui nei. Mana ki tia o mātou wānau ki roto i ngā ohipera. Me ngā iwi rawa kore o tēnei ao. E mihi ana ki a koutou. Nau mai, hara mai tō aroha ki a mātou e tēnei pō. E mihi ana hoki, hara mai tō aroha ki te manuhiri tangata, kua haere mai konei ki te tautoko te kaupapa. E mihi ana ki a koutou katoa, e tai mai nei ki te tautoko te kaupapa, he tautoko te tangata manuhiri, kua haere mai konei. E mihi ana ki a koutou e tēnei wā. E mihi ana hoki ki a mana whenua, Ngāti Whātua o Rākei, mō tō aroha he manaakitanga ki a tātou e tēnei pō. Nō reira, kei te mihi atu ki a koutou, tūturu whakamaua ki a tīna, haumi e, hui e, tāeki e, ko rangi, ko papa, ka puto, ko rongo. Ko tāni mauta, ko tangaro, ko tūmatauinga, ko aumi e tiki, ko tāwiri mātia. Tōka nā te rangi ki runga, ko papa ki raro, ka pote te ira tangata ki te whai ao, ki te ao mārama. A tūturu whakamaua ki a tīna, haumi e, hui e, tāeki e, a tēnā tātou katoa, e noho tātou. Ka tūku ti mauri ki te MC mō te pō.
Thank you, Malcolm. What a beautiful voice you have. Kia ora te whānau. Tēnā koutou katoa. I am Simon Wilson, footloose and fancy-free. Actually, not quite true. I write a column at The Listener these days called City Desk. I do recommend it to you. The Listener's a fantastic magazine. But that's not why I'm here this evening. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. We have really excellent turnout here. And welcome also to those people who are watching online, because this event is being streamed. Auckland Conversations, as I'm sure most of you know, runs a series of events like this. They play an enormously valuable role in putting ideas about city building in front of us, allowing discussion and debate, allowing us to hear from expert visitors, and keep on this difficult but very rewarding process of building a better city. A few housekeeping rules. If you need the bathrooms, they are over in that corner there. If there is an emergency and you leave through that exit, the assembly point will be out on the upper grass area out there. If you leave through these exits, you'll find yourself in the rabbit warren of backstage. There will be a warden, I'm assured, to tell you where to go, and your assembly point will be out on Merrill Drive. Please make sure your phones are on silent. You don't have to turn them off, and I advise you not to turn them off because obviously you'll be wanting to use your social media to talk about how exciting all this is as we go through the evening. And also, we are going to have questions later on, and we're going to do it with Slido. There it is. If you know how to do Slido, if you don't, ask someone next to you or Google it. But the number is there. Put your questions into Slido. They will be moderated, and I will have a tablet and will be selecting some of those later to ask. Now, the format for tonight will be a presentation by our keynote speaker, Alain Berthaud, followed by a discussion, and that discussion with Slido. And then we will hear from Megan Tyler, who's the Council's Head of Planning. Megan has to rush away after she has spoken, so it won't be rude on her part for us, and we will let her go at that point. We will then have a conversation, myself, with Alain and Richard Hills, who is the councillor who chairs the Planning Committee. He also has to rush away as soon as he's done some of his bits, so we'll let that happen as well. But, of course, if you use Slido, many of the questions are going to come from you. Welcome back to New Zealand for Alain Berthaud. He is an urbanist and architect, formerly the principal urban planner with the World Bank, author of the book Order Without Design: How Markets Shape Cities. Order Without Design explores the ways that market forces and urban planning interact to shape our cities. And it has a remarkable distinction. Remarkable not just in urban planning terms, but in almost everything to do with politics. The distinction of having been widely praised right across the political spectrum. If you want proof of that, last time he was here in 2014, Alain's engagements earned him praise from both the New Zealand Initiative and Greater Auckland, then known as the Transport Blog. New Zealand Initiative was Alain's host on that occasion and has reprised the role this time, along with Te Waihanga, the Infrastructure Commission. Our thanks to you for bringing him out. 2014, when he was last here. Who remembers it? The Northern Busway was 6 years old and clearly a success. And we were all thinking what possibilities there are in this city for mass transit. But the Waterview interchange was, along with the completed State Highway 20 and State Highway 16 ring route, still 3 years away from opening. Commuter rail had not yet been electrified. Commuter bus routes were not yet overhauled. The CRL was a glimmer in the visionary Len Brown's eye and a stone-cold no from the government. It would be another 2 years before that changed. The city centre master plan was 2 years old, but the Auckland Unitary Plan was still 2 years away from becoming operative. Housing construction was moribund unless you were in the business of building luxury housing. The Auckland Unitary Plan, the AUP, unlocked that along with new directions from the government. And could I just say in relation to Len Brown, I remember asking him once, was he happy that the Auckland Unitary Plan was such a compromise on what might have been regarded as grander ideals? And he said, of course I am. This is politics. If it's not good enough, you don't fret. It's all process. You get what you can, and you do what you can, and you build on it, and you keep building on it. And that was his philosophy of politics. I think it is probably most politicians' philosophy of politics, and it's the story of the AUP itself. Also in 2014, the Harbour Bridge was near to collapse and urgently needed replacing. But hey, Ron's had been invented 5 years earlier. Alain said some deliciously provocative things in 2014. One of them was cities are job markets, and the more people who live close enough to jobs, the better the city functions. He said travel times are a marker for productivity, and he quoted the example of 25 French cities where a 10% reduction in average commute time increased the size of the labour market by 15 to 18%. He also said in South Korean cities, a 10% increase in the number of jobs accessible per worker corresponds to a 2.4% increase in workers' productivity. These are not issues that we hear about very much in our constant fretting about productivity. He said, affordable housing is critical. Workers should be able to live reasonably near to where they work or where they might work. So he advocated a quantifiable target, mean house prices related to household incomes, not the kind of target we often hear about these days, measurable goals. And he said that because of the way induced demand works, bigger roads will increase the number of cars on the road, but that won't necessarily reduce travel times. And he said that the urban village model of the city, what we now more commonly think of as a 15-minute city, doesn't exist in the real world. Since Alain's 2014 visit, the AUP has allowed sustained housing growth both up and out. We have far more apartments than we used to, far more townhouses, and despite the fantasy that living on the periphery allows families to have a home with a backyard for the kids, we have thousands more greenfield houses built more closely together than Ponsonby villas, without even the backyards that those villas enjoy. And quite a few of them have to get their water services delivered on the back of a truck. Rents are not as high as they might have been, but affordability remains elusive. And we are now mired in a gigantic debate about the future of the city fringe, that donut of beautiful houses whose owners enjoy, on the whole, the best services in the city, and many of those same owners being very determined not to share. Governments have required the council to rethink this, and it has responded 3 times, with Plan Change 78 and then with Plan Change 120, and most recently with a fiercely frank observation that it will abide by the rules and guidelines established centrally, but it will make its own decisions, and it will not tolerate the idea that Cabinet should sign off street by street on the city's new planning rules. And so we turn to Alain Bertard. You're in the middle of a minefield, mate. But you're welcome. You're going to talk about how to make cities work. I assume the pun is intended. It is a topic that has caused more than a few people in this particular city to come to grief. Richard Harris, who's here in the audience, told me a little while ago that you had worked with Le Corbusier. And Eric Crampton told me that you didn't just work with him. At age 23, you hitchhiked across the Middle East to India in order to get to work with him. Who has a work story like that? Amazing. We salute you. We are all ears. Let's hear it for Alain Bertard.
Thank you for this very generous introduction. A minefield, yes, but you are not the only one with a minefield. Practically every modern city is trying to find solution to the problem you are confronted with. And because I still travel a lot and I monitor what is happening, I'm glad to say that you are one of the cities which is the most advanced in reform. I'm not saying that you reach nirvana or paradise yet, but I think you have done more reform that cities are, contemplating now and still hesitating. So for me, my second trip to this city is also to learn, and I've been amazed in the last few days I spent in New Zealand to see how many of issues you have already solved. However, there are still many. And by the way, there is never a stage where a city is perfect and you can rest and say, this is it. A city is constantly changing, constantly confronted to internal shock, but also external one, like, for instance, rate of inflation, price of energy, COVID, all these things. And a city survives only because it adapts. It's a living organism. It's not a finished building. A finished building can be a masterpiece, and then it will become heritage, and it's wonderful. But a city is just the opposite. It's something which has to be constantly evolving to respond to the need of the citizen. So after this long introduction, let's start. This is my outline. So cities are labor market, and I would like to, I will have to define exactly what I mean for that. Sometimes people are a little think that in a city we should only work and then take the subway and go to bed. Well, that's not exactly what I mean. So I will explain what it means. Then I will move right away to the task of urban planners. In my book, sometimes I'm critical of urban planners. I'm one of them, by the way. I'm an architect by training, but I moved to urban planning, and I think that urban planners have an enormous role to play. Sometimes they are not allowed to play it because they are just asked to enforce existing rule, content in a master plan. Sometimes the planning department do not have the resource to be analytic. Urban planners should be analytic, analyze what is happening in the city constantly, not every 10 years for a master plan. So I would like to describe what I think are the tasks of urban planners. I think that what I see from here in New Zealand, I think many of your urban planners have already taken a lot of those tasks. And then finally, I will have a last part which will discuss the task of the urban planner to monitoring what is happening. Because when we plan something, it's not necessarily what is happening. The city has a will of its own. The city is made of households and firms. Those households have different income. Their income, some of them increase, some of them stay stagnant, possibly some are lower. The role of the planner is to cater to all of them, specifically for housing and transport. So I will go about how to monitor the city in a way. The role of that planner should play, and they are again often in many other cities not playing. I think they are distracted by other issues, and I think so. My goal, my suggestion, is not when I say cities are driven by market. I am not suggesting that there is no need for planners, just the market will do it. Not at all. Market is just a mechanism. I am suggesting that planners have a very important role, but they should concentrate on this role and not be distracted by things like, for instance, the 15-minute city, which is a distraction. So cities as labor market. First, I would like to define what I mean by labor market. The most important part of labor market is market. Labor market doesn't mean that everybody has a job. This is, of course, very desirable, but that's not enough. Labor market means that you are able to change job during your career and to follow the skill that you have been given and that you have acquired through education, and change job as you go. There are many different jobs, and many of them in modern society are extremely specialized. And to take a specialty or move to another allow you to, it's a human fulfillment to do something useful. We have all completely different ability and characters. all of them, I think, are useful in a society. We speak a lot about people who have to be creative, inventive. Well, some job, yes, but certain jobs, you don't, should not. For instance, you don't want an accountant to be too creative and imaginative. It may backfire badly. So, and it's very important that some people very strictly follow a regulation with a lot of conscience. But some of them should not. So again, this is complementarity of people, and you get there. Maybe you have a degree in as an accountant, and suddenly you like to be creative, and maybe you will start having maybe classes in architecture, or maybe sculpture or music, and you will end up as a musician and be creative. Or you are trained as a musician and you will end up as an accountant. So I think that a city should allow that. And that's where you will get really a productive society, if all of us are trying more or less to conform to our ability. Now, what that has to do with planning? Well, if you are in a city, if you want to change job, you should first be able to live someplace in the city, and then from this place be able to access a job anywhere in the city, not just in your neighborhood, but anywhere in the city. And that's a condition for, again, achieving your potential as a human being, but also everybody will benefit if everybody has exactly the job for which he is able to. So this is my definition of the labor market, again, is not to be able to access your job in 10 minutes, is to be able to change job, selecting the best job among all the jobs which are available. For that, you need a transport system which allow you to move from one place to another, and you need, of course, to have to afford housing in different part of the city. So then I move to markets. What are markets? A market is not a god, it's not a religion, it's a mechanism. It's a mechanism like gravity. So gravity, we know, by the way, by having people stand in space, that gravity is indispensable for our health. Our whole system works for gravity. However, if we stumble on a sidewalk and break our leg, this is also gravity. So we have to understand gravity. And for market, it's the same thing. Market does wonderful thing, but sometimes it has outcome that we're not pleased with it. For instance, market doesn't solve the problem of car pollution, for instance. They are the environmental system, so we have to find substitute for market for that. However, many of my urban colleagues, I must say, I'm not talking about anybody in this room, of course, have a suspicion of market, and they say we had rather ignore market because they do not work. The prices are distorted, and so if you try to solve the problem of a city and saying I want to ignore market, I want just to design a city, it's a bit like designing an airplane and saying I'm going to ignore gravity, because recently a plane fell down and because of gravity. So I'm going to design an airplane. Now, I don't advise you to fly in this airplane if it was designed like that. So let us talk about, because a city, the transport system is so important, and labor market works if the transport system works well. Let us look a bit at the trip in a city. Here I have three graphs. One, that's right. On the right is a traditional city, that economists call monocentric. That means most of the jobs are in the center. Not only the job, but the amenities also. Things like library, cinema, good restaurant. There is a concentration there. And then you have, so in the center of the city, you have high density. And then in the suburb, you have lower densities. And you have radio-concentric trip from somewhere in the suburb to the center. If you have this system, this structure of city, it's relatively simple to have public transport. You can use, of course, a car, but as the density increases, the car becomes less and less efficient because, the problem with the car is that it consumes a lot of real estate. So the larger the city, the more expensive become the real estate, and it's very difficult to price all the real estate you consume. When you buy a house, you pay for the real estate you consume. Sometime it happened to me that I drive my car on Fifth Avenue in New York. When I do that at 25 kilometers an hour, below the speed limit, of course, I consume 80 square meters of land in Fifth Avenue. So recently now I'm paying $9 a day to do that, which is pretty cheap for Fifth Avenue. But it still works. It reduced a bit the consumption of some people. So let us look. This model, in fact, of monocentric city do not work anymore. It's not very representative for cities which are above 1 million, and even now maybe 500,000. In fact, it becomes much more complex than that. So my second graph on the middle represents cities where the jobs are completely dispersed within the city, and also the amenities. So cities like that were emerged in America, in North America, in the 20s probably, maybe a little before, where North Americans were the first to be able to afford cars on a large scale. In 1920, for instance, in Europe, only few people could afford a car. So those cities were built around the car, and it has the advantage, of course, that a car always responds to demand in terms of you always have your car when you want it. The problem, of course, is again that the car consumes a lot of real estate. So when the city is small, it works relatively well. When the city is larger, it's very difficult to attribute so much land that a car. Therefore, we have the third model, which represents, in fact, the majority of cities, where you have, in fact, the two models superimposed. Why those two models superimposed? If you start with a monocentric city, why has every monocentric city evolved toward this composite model? It's because when a city becomes larger, the center, the price of the rent in the center become more expensive. And therefore, there are a lot of business who will prefer to move to the periphery, especially those who consume more land. Very often, even now with the internet, you see headquarters of company who stay in the center, but many of the workers are somewhere in the periphery, or even somewhere in another country. It could be in the Philippines or somewhere like that. So this is, again, what cities are confronted with, this constant change in technology and things like that. Now, this is what, so we have now a system where if you are dealing with transport, you are still a lot of people going to the center, and then things like buses, express buses, BRT, subway work relatively well for that. But because you have a lot of jobs also distributed in the periphery, you have a lot of trips which are from periphery to periphery, suburb to suburbs, and for that, we have not found yet a nice way of going around, and that's why a lot of people are using cars. It's very uneconomical to run a transit system when you have dispersed origin and dispersed destination, because for every route you have only very few trips. So it's very difficult to do that. So for the moment, we're mostly using car for that, and it creates congestion. Now here, there is also, so far I've been talking about transport, which is mostly the role of urban planners to design transport or transport engineer. But I'm showing here the pattern of trips in the city of Paris. Here we have, in red there, in pink, this is historical Paris. That means the center of Paris. 2 million people who live there. In Paris, you have 12 million people. This is a blue area. These are the suburbs. And you see that there is a high concentration of jobs still in Paris. There are twice as many jobs as active people. But many of those jobs are taken by people who are commuting from the suburbs. However, about 30% of the people who live in Paris, in spite of having this surabundance of jobs, decide to work in the suburbs. And some not only go to the suburb, but they go even outside the suburbs, farther away. Why that? Well, that's the way labor market works. They select the best job for them, and they are ready even to commute more than an hour in order to get to the job they want. And it's not because urban planners failed to provide jobs in the center, it's because that's the way labor market works. It is the decision, the individual decision of household. And you cannot predict that. All you have to do is to monitor it, and that will be, the theme of my next thing. Oh, before that, I just show some land use analysis that my wife did when we were traveling here in Auckland 12 years ago. It's just a land use, she collected the data and used a GIS to provide land use and density thing, but it's now stored. So now let us look at Auckland. You have a beautiful setting because you have the sea on both sides, and you have a very complexity of coastline. If you compare to Miami, you see that, which has a straight coastline like that. This is very different. This is full of charm, and it makes certainly life more interesting to have that. But it has a cost also, because a lot of the land is used for water. A lot of land cannot, I have drawn here a circle of 10-kilometer radius, and within this circle, you can develop only 63% of the land. The rest of the land is water. Maybe there are also some mountains, something that you cannot develop. So this, compared to a city in Texas, where you can, if you draw a circle of 10-kilometer radius, the entire land can be developed, without problem. It's flat. You can also very easily go from suburb to suburb. Here you have I would say, liability, but you have planners with brain, and the idea of having a brain is that you solve problem when you are confronted with them. You don't say, well, it's like I was living in Texas. No, you are not living in Texas, so you have to solve this problem. And I think that's what you have been doing. Now, to show what type of problem is it, here, that's also a drawing which was done by my wife. She drew a circle from the city center of Auckland, and she calculated at every kilometer how much land was built up, how much land was on island, because when you reach 10 kilometers, some are in islands, so they are not likely, you need a ferry to go there. And how much land was undeveloped and how much was water. Water, of course, is blue. So you see again here the spread of the land, of the usable land, and this spread is precisely because of your topography. So you have, in fact, for a relatively population, you need a much longer network of transport in order, again, to have everybody have access to transport and can move around the city. This is, again, the 10 the circle with 10-kilometer radius. You see here more the problem. I represent here exactly the same 10 kilometer, but the city of Paris, the historical city of Paris, the municipality of Paris is in yellow there, and then around are the suburbs. So you see within this 10 kilometer, this circle with 10-kilometer radius, you fit the entire city of Paris plus suburbs. Within the city, you have already 2 million people there, and with a suburb, I didn't calculate it exactly, but probably you have 3 million people who are fitting in the... But here we didn't have to show much imagination. Paris is nearly flat, and so you can develop transport, in any way you want, so without much constraint. So you have to be much more inventive than we have been. So now, what is confronted with this problem? What is the task of the urban planner? First, obviously, you have to project the need based on assumption. You have to make assumption. In 10 years, we will have that much population. You have to make assumption about where those people will want to settle, because, again, every household is making a trade-off between the location, the amount of land this household wants to consume, and the amount of floor space. That means some people will insist on a single-family house. Others will be quite happy to live in a townhouse. Others will decide to live in an apartment. And, of course, usually the apartment will be closer to the center, and a large lot will be farther away from the center. So those are trade-offs that every family does, and even within the same income, some family will make completely different trade-off. And this urban planner do not know in advance, and they could calculate an average, but an average of different choice doesn't give you anything. It's actually very misleading. Now, if we look at our traditional zoning law, you have a map, and on this map, an urban planner has said, here the minimum lot size is going to be 400 square meters. It will be a single-family house, and the floor area will be 400 square meters, 300 square meters, something like that. It's decided in advance, it's designed by the floor ratio will decide that. So the planner has done that in advance in order to be able to project what you need in terms of land use. But in fact, by doing that, the planners made a trade-off. He substitute himself to the family who want to live somewhere. Because, again, depending on the amount of land you consume and floor space you consume, the price of housing will be very different, and depending where you consume it. So again, this trade-off has to be done individually, and I think that many of planning regulation are done in good faith in order to know what is going to happen in the future. So we have to assume that some household will consume a certain amount of land and floor space, but we have transformed this projection into regulation, and therefore we have created a straitjacket in which we have prevented household to this trade-off. So what we have to do, planners have to continue doing projection, of course, but they have to realize that it is a projection. It is not, it's something that they thought will happen, but it may happen differently. The people, a city is made of people. It's not made of roads and buildings. It's made of people first. And it's the people who decide what they want to do and where they want to have access to job, or how long they want to commute. Some people would like to commute 15 minutes, other 1 hour. They will be happy in order to have a house with a view or next to a beach, maybe, to commute 1 hour. That's their business. It is not the urban planner who should decide that. So if this is so, what is the job of the planner? If it makes a projection, but the projection is only partially fulfilled, then what is it? Well, the first thing is to monitor what is happening, monitor prices. The planners, or maybe associated with an economist, possibly, should monitor the evolution of prices all over a metropolitan area. And it should also monitor the income of the people, not only the median income, and we'll discuss that a little later, but the distribution of, if you have a median income, that means 50% of the people have an income lower than it, and 50% have an income higher than that. So that's a long range. So when the price of house, the price of land, and the price of construction change, and it will change over time, that will completely change the trade-off that family will make. And so the job of the planner is to adapt its regulation or to what the people want, not what the planner has projected. Now, the temptation is to say, I'm a planner, I project that. If I force people into my projections are right, I did a good job. But it's at the expense of the people. So one way to deal with prices, is of course to increase the supply of developable land. So again here, to do that, you have first one of the job of the planner is to separate what is private from what is public. What is public are streets, of course, but also parks, beaches, things that, natural feature that you don't want to be built upon. This is completely arbitrary. It's top down. It depends entirely on your topography. Again, if you are in Texas, I hope nobody's from Texas here. If you are in Texas, well, maybe that's my prejudice. There's not much to preserve. So, you can, of course, you should have some park and playground from time to time, but say, it's not really decided by the topography. In your country, certainly there are a lot of areas that are very sensitive to the topography. You have also storm drainage is very important, and so you have to follow, if you have some river or low point, you have to take that into account and reserve them. This is top down. This is not a market. It's opposite of the market. You are saying the market is not going to play its role along beaches, or a little mountain that you want to preserve or something like that. So this separation is the role of the planner long in advance. This is an example. This is a plan of Barcelona by a planner. By the way, the planner at the time were calling themselves surveyors because their job was just to separate what was public from what was private. So all they did, they had a transit, the view, a theodolite, and they would trace streets, and they would separate where the market will play, the plat, and what will be outside the market. So this is what Cerda did at the time when he was living in Barcelona, so it's the middle of the 19th century. The city of Barcelona was, the black area there surrounded by red. This was the size of the city at the time. And you see that he planned a city 13 times the size of the existing one. It doesn't mean that in the next 5 years the city was built that way. What was the advantage of doing that? The advantage was doing that was he established a land market which was working very well. Most people wanted to live as close as the existing city as possible. But the fact that there was a clear delimitation between what's private, what's public on a large area means that the landowner which were close to the city were still confronted with a competition, with other landowner, which was a little further. If somebody charged too much, you could always go next block or next block. And that's the way market works. So market do not work by providing exactly the amount of land you need year 1, year 2, year 3. Markets work if you have a large potential supply and that the consumer select where they want to be at the time, taking into account the land price. So you see, that again, the idea that the way land prices work is like that. So now, let us look at the other job of market is, urban planner, excuse me, is to develop indicators. You have to monitor what is happening. This is opposite of a master plan. A master plan is like an architect. You design a blueprint, and after you have 10 years to build according to this blueprint. This is the way an architect works, and it's completely correct for a building. Do not innovate, do not change things after the plan has been done and construction has started. Don't change. A building is just the opposite. You make a projection, you think this is going to happen, and it happens differently. So you have to monitor every 6 months what is happening. You will see people ask for consent. The distribution of consent will be different, probably not what you have projected. Eventually, densities are going to be different from what you have projected. You have to constantly adjust. If you say, no, you have to follow my plan because I projected this way and you better do this trade-off, you are not going to have a very efficient city. You are going to have if you have an affordable housing, is exactly for this reason. So you have to monitor land prices constantly, and when they change, you have to allow change in the consumption of household. You have to monitor income. Income of the people are changing over time, and depending on your economy, sometimes they increase very much, sometimes they are stagnant. Some group of people have a stagnant income, and others have become very rich. You have to monitor that. You have also, of course, to monitor, the amount of rental and property, what is the rent, etc. You have to, at the same time, what is the role of politicians with that? Politicians are elected and they are responsible for the city, and therefore they have to establish the objective. The politicians are not technician. There are certain things that they may not have to do, but they set objective. For instance, I suppose that now housing affordability is a big issue and transport is a big issue. So politicians are going to distribute the resource of the taxpayer to certain objectives. And thus, no technocrat, no technician like me or any other can establish what are the correct priorities. There is no formula to say what is the correct priority for Auckland this year. Should we spend more on transport or less on school or more on housing? It's only, this is a political decision. And we technicians have just to respond to the objectives set by the politician. And we have to advise these politicians, well, if you want to lower the rent or the housing price, these are, there is never a silver bullet. You want to say, just do that and it will happen. Probably we will have to say, you have to do 25 things or maybe 50 things at the same time, and it will happen. And of course, there will be a resistance to change, especially, by the way, in a city which is well run, like Auckland. People are relatively happy there. They know housing is expensive, but if you already have your house, you are quite happy there. There is no reason to change. The people who want change are usually the young people who have a good education and they have a good job, but they cannot find a house. So there will be a resistance to change, and again, that's the role of the politician and the press. By the way, the press has an important role to play to explain what the problems are, without maybe going in so many details as I'm going to with you tonight. Maybe simplify issue in order to explain why these changes are necessary and what will be the benefit for entire society about it. Another monitoring, after the objective has been defined, and then the technician have discussed with the politician the measure which have to be taken. Then you have to monitor very carefully if what you have recommended is bearing fruit, if it's efficient, if it works. You cannot experiment with a city in a laboratory. You experiment in real terms. You experiment with a city. So you may be wrong. I've been working 60 years in this field and working in a lot of land development in many cities. I tell you, I have a number, of skeletons in my closet, and I'm not ashamed of it. I mean, I hopefully learned from it. I think I did. But the big sin is not to be wrong. The big sin is knowing you're wrong and just continue doing it because you don't want to recognize you were wrong. And again, if you have not failed 2 or 3 times and you don't recognize you have failed, probably you're not a very good planner. So, I have a problem. Income distribution is very important because after all, if you monitor the price of land and the price of construction, is that it should fit the income of everybody in the income curve. Not only the rich, not the middle, not the people who have only the medium income, but people who are below the medium income and people who are above. So the housing, the way the income distribution, the income is distributed among households is very important if you want to provide different type of houses which are affordable to different income group. Now, traditionally, when I represent here a number of graphs when I show where our income is distributed. My problem with that is that those bars do not correspond to an equal difference of income. And therefore, it gives, I think, a lot of very important information. I'm not saying it's silly, not at all. But I don't think it gives a good picture of the household which are in a city. So what I propose is to use this information, but represent it differently. Now, I was not able myself, from the data I had to do it one evening in my hotel 2 days ago. I was not able really to do it very correctly as it should be done. So I am using a traditional formula for income distribution. So do not take this household income distribution too seriously. It's just to show the methodology. If you represent every income, here we are talking about income per year. Here I have represented with interval of $10,000 yearly income. And vertically, I don't put a percentage. I put the number of households which are in this group. then you have a complete image of the distribution of your household by income group. And then you see that the median income, which is represented in red here, is not very representative of anybody, really, a small group of people. So you will have, and you see also that the number of people who are on the left of the median income are probably the one who require the most care, in order to find that they find affordable housing. So there you will try to design a policy. So for the very low income and people, in every city you have people who have problem finding a job. Sometimes they have bad luck. Sometimes they have bad health. And their income remain very low. There is no doubt that the city should build some public housing and independently of their income say, well, you can live here, that's fine. Normally, this should not represent more than 5% of the income. Maybe up to 10%, you could subsidize some. If you start subsidizing more than 10% of the housing, in a way you are saying, as planner, I am unable to distribute infrastructure and land in such a way that people can afford housing, so to erase my mediocrity, I will use the taxpayer money and I will distribute it myself. And so everybody can afford it. Now, everybody can afford it, but with your tax money. So the government take you one side and say, don't worry, we will give you a house. By the way, that's the way the Soviet Union worked. In the Soviet Union, I used to work there the last year of Gorbachev and all that. My counterparts were paid $25 a month. Now you say, and they were urban planners, they had shoes, they were eating well. So how come with $25 that they could live? Because the Soviet system was to tax people 95% of their income, give them enough money for vodka and cigarette, and then redistribute it in goods. So the state decided the consumption. If you were an architect, you had access to the restaurant of the architect club, which was wonderful. You had caviar, you had things like that, but it never appeared. You never paid for it, or you pay 1 ruble or something like that. If you were a worker, usually you had the canteen in your factory, and even your clothes were distributed by the factory. So you see, we should not go this way, and we are very far from it. But in a way, when people like in New York pretend that they can subsidize 50% of the population, they say, this is completely wrong, because they will need to raise taxes to do that so much that the system will not work. Or again, for housing in the Soviet system, rents were extremely low. At the time of inflation, we were evaluating the inflation was so high that we were using pack of cigarettes as a unit rather than rubles, and the rent sometimes were about 3 or 4 packs of cigarettes a month, which was of course very cheap, except that to have an apartment you have to wait 25 years. So again, this idea of subsidizing as more and more apartments in order to make them affordable is not correct. Again, you should subsidize a small group of people that you can afford. Now, one of my last slides is on top of this income group, you can superimpose several things, like housing typology. For instance, this is the work I did when I was advising Hanoi in Vietnam on housing. Every city has certain type of housing. For instance, here to simplify, I will say single-family housing, townhouses, apartment, say 4-story apartment and tower, for instance. So you look at all these apartments are distributed in the city, and you superimpose it in your income distribution. Because don't forget that every time you have a household, this household is living somewhere in the city. That's why this household is on this graph. So you know where the housing stock here, and then you can see how this housing stock evolve. I'm running a bit out of time now. You have also to monitor reform. So here I'm borrowing directly from the work of my colleague here in Auckland. This is a graph which shows the production of houses. Well, it's not production. It's demand. I mean, it's a building permit. Sorry, it's consent. Excuse me. And in green here, you have single-family house, and in blue, you have townhouses. So you see that the line, the vertical line, is a reform. Before reform, it appears that there were very little demand for townhouses. Suddenly, you remove the constraint of the zoning, and you say, it's possible in some area to construct townhouses, and suddenly you see that it surged. So this monitoring is very important, because what was constraining demand was not that people were not interested in townhouses. It was that the regulation did not allow townhouses. So how do you know that? So, for instance, it's like during Prohibition in the United States, if you forbid the use of alcohol, you think, well, Americans are not interested in drinking. Well, they were. So that's monitoring demand. Now here, I have something which is even more interesting, because building houses is important, but the ultimate goal is to make housing affordable. It's not so much to build houses. So here is a graph which shows, again, Auckland compared to the rest of New Zealand. It's a rent-to-income ratio. That means the affordability of rent. And so the green line is New Zealand, and the blue line is Auckland. And you see that the curve varies, but you see that after the reform, the blue line is going down, where the green line is going up. That means this is impact. This means you build new houses, and the objective that the politician asks you to solve to reduce the rent is happening. So this is what urban planners should do. Monitor what is happening to see what works. When it works, then do it again. Continue doing it. If it works more or less, tinker with it. If it doesn't work at all, change it. I will pass that. So I have the last, I call that urban planning principle. So I will go quickly over that. There is no optimal permanent urban structure. Urban structures change all the time. What is good today might not be good in 10 years. Technology change, consumer tastes change. Planners have to define in advance clear boundary between private land and public space. And again, this is arbitrary, this is top-down, this is judgmental. The planning department should be reinforced. I think there should be more people and more diverse people, and they should monitor what is happening. They should make projection as they used to do, but do not transform, say projection or projection. And they should adjust them, because monitoring income, prices, and things like that, and finally, we should not only monitor the direct outcome, for instance, the number of houses, but the ultimate objective, or could the impact, is a rent, or the price of housing. This is the ultimate goal. It's not just to build housing. It's the same way as if you build a subway, the objective is not to build a subway. It's a good thing to do it, but the ultimate goal is to reduce the time to access jobs from any part of the city. Thank you very much.
Alan, thank you so much. That was inspiring. Nice to pull our heads up from the present and listen and learn from you. So thank you, and looking forward to the panel discussion. I get 5 or so minutes to have a bit of reflection of what I've heard and a few comments. So, ko Megan Tyler Tukuingoa. I'm Megan, and I'm the Director of Policy Planning and Governance at Auckland Council. It's a privilege to be part of what is an ever-changing and exciting opportunity here in Auckland and Tamaki Makaurau to think about our future, but also our present. Cities are about people. That's why we're all here today. For whatever reason, they are about people. They're about their values. They reflect something of ourselves, whether that's the area we live in because we have a choice and we love what that represents, or it's broader values, things that are important to us, things that we treasure. And as Alan has said, they change over time. We're a very young country, we're therefore a very young city. We can see, obviously, overseas in history, there are some cities and regions that have layers of cities and regions underneath them. We're not at that level, but they change. Here in Tamaki Makaurau, we have had a pretty constant conversation, I think, for over 10 years now, around the form of our region. It started particularly just after our amalgamation in 2010 as we looked to create the Auckland Unitary Plan. It can feel combative at times, particularly lately in Auckland. And Simon referenced the 3 kind of goes we're having at intensification right now based on political desires. And so that can sometimes be combative. We know that people, including us as individuals too, can be resistant to change. We can sometimes retire into our particular corners, and we sometimes find it hard to move into and to move towards each other to work together on some of this. And so sessions like this, certainly for me and I hope for you, provide that opportunity to open our minds to think about different experiences where we might want to get to learn and to question and hopefully to move closer together as we care about the city and the region of Tamaki Makaurau. Some things I heard from Alan. I love the reminder that most modern cities are grappling with some of the things that we are. That is nice to remember, even though our geography is so very unique. We're such an isthmus, a long isthmus, 3 harbours, that poses challenges but has enormous opportunities and beautiful environments. And we are doing great work. We are solving some of these problems that others can learn from us, and that's always really nice to know. Analysis is key. I like that for what we're doing. Planners have an important role, and one of them is to understand the context of the city, the region, the kind of the way it works, the vibe it has, and what that really means and links to the values that we have. My summary of a labour market, and I know that there will be lots of questions coming from this in the panel session shortly. What does a labour market need? I heard it needs access. It needs to be able to move around. It needs to be clear about the trade-offs of choices, so it enables choices and to be clear about what those trade-offs really mean. That's the trade-offs where you live, where you work, where you play, where you meet other people, where you do stuff. And it needs choice. You, as individuals, need to be able to choose as much as one can with all of the factors in one's life, however much you can to have choice. You made a number of comments around the role of a planner. I quite liked, or I've summarised it, kind of be okay with failure. I kind of like that. And that's not just planners, but probably anyone who works in this kind of industry. Because things change, we know it doesn't always work. And there was a good challenge there for us to continue to monitor and therefore change that up, keep doing some of the good stuff, and maybe change up the stuff that isn't working so well. When we regulate, so those of us in public sector and politicians, when we regulate, we are effectively creating some trade-offs. We've made some trade-offs in order to regulate, and so that has, in a way, removed some of that trade-off from individuals. But nonetheless, even if we've done that in good faith, that's part of the trade-off kind of conversation that regulation creates. You talked a lot about, increasing the supply of developable land, and the fact that that's great, and that the private sector in particular can particularly use that. But that alongside that, you also need the public sector. So because the market is not going to deal with some stuff because it's not worth it to the market as a mechanism, then that also needs public investment, public land, infrastructure, alongside the more developable land. So we always do need to work, and the closer we can work together, the better outcomes we can make. And of course, a reminder, if we needed it, Councillor Hills and others I see, that we work in a political environment. And so as much as we, as officials and in the private sector and consultants, will provide advice, that advice is sometimes taken, is sometimes not taken. There's compromise and trade-offs in the decisions that are made, at a political level. Just to finish up my comments before we get the panel going, I think it is true that there is now more and more recognition, certainly in Auckland Council, but I think wider too, on the recognition that of the role that markets play, whether it's in cities or regions, and the role, therefore, that planning, infrastructure provision plays in that as well. It doesn't have to be a combative relationship between, markets and public goods or economics and planning, however you want to kind of frame that. I think it has been and still is a little bit. It doesn't have to be, though. So there's far more recognition of that and the importance and the massive lever that land use, transport infrastructure has on the well-being, therefore, of our people and our region, and the opportunity for productivity and prosperity. The Auckland-specific evidence on the impacts of the unitary plan, Alan had a few slides on that at the end, on our housing market outcomes has contributed to this understanding. So planning policy settings do make an impact. They do influence outcomes, and the market, the way the cities work, the vibe of the cities, the more we can work closely with that and understand that, the better the outcomes will be. So look, as planners, I think we do need to continue to strive to strike the right balance, providing clarity about how growth will be guided while allowing flexibilities for Aucklanders, for individuals, for businesses to accommodate a growing population, to make those trade-offs and to make those choices that they have within the city. So insights like those that Alana has shared tonight are really valuable because they help us step back and think about these questions. So thank you again. We've got another, hopefully a little bit more than 10 minutes, but we'll get the panel up now. Councillor Hills, I'd like to particularly welcome as the chair of the Policy Planning and Development Committee at Auckland Council, and Simon, you will take us through some of the Slido questions. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Megan. Very much appreciated. Just before we go to Slido, I do have a couple of questions, and I know, Richard, you need to get away to another event at the other end of town pretty quickly, so perhaps I can start with a question to you. as I understand it, Alain, in terms of what you were saying, it's not the planner's business to tell people where to live. It's not the planner's business. The planner's job is to adapt to where people want to live.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Richard, that's a proposition that the council wrestles with all the time, because you have to decide where infrastructure is going to go, and you have to have an infrastructure plan for how things are developed, when they're developed, and you are trying, I'm thinking about a place like Warkworth, you are trying to develop a city where things are done in a sequence that is economically feasible and doesn't put enormous burdens on the rates and other income sources for the whole city. So how do you respond to that idea that it's the planner's job simply to adapt to where people want to live?
Kia ora koutou katoa. Nice to see you all here. Lots of familiar faces. But and sorry, I am rushing off to the New Zealander of the Year awards down the road, which has already started. But I'll find my place. The key, well, the question there is a really hard one, because it should be easy, it should be evidence-based, and we should roll out exactly what is needed where it's needed. But I think the politics, in my opinion, has got in the way a lot in the city. But also, we've got this issue of infrastructure, and sometimes the infrastructure isn't seen. So a lot of people assume intensification, we can't possibly do it because we have no infrastructure, but they kind of are okay with 4,000 homes being built in the middle of nowhere where there isn't any infrastructure, and that kind of seems like an invisible cost to people. So I guess our job at the moment, and we've seen the reiteration of it, is that at the moment governments of both shades or all colours, whatever we want to think of them as at the moment, are sort of telling us they want to liberalise everything until it affects the residents, which happen to be our residents too, in certain parts of the city and in certain ways. And then the backlash kind of comes back to us to then change the way they want or they perceive we are or aren't doing the right thing, which can be different within a cabinet, as we've seen this time, or can be different within parties. But often it's trying to figure out how we're getting the right ability for people to have options at all parts of people's lives. So I don't think it's just young people that we're missing out on. It's also older people wanting to downsize from the family home, which would free up those family homes to move into something smaller within a community that they've brought their family up in, which at the moment we still don't have those options for.
Alain, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, for instance, one of the policy which is essential is to increase the supply of land in greenfield land. So obviously, if the land is greenfield, nobody is there. However, the price of land there is an indicator whether people would like to live there or not, or the price of land in the area which is already built. That's the limit of the greenfield. So I think we can be guided by those things, and again, providing that the planning department monitor the price of land very carefully and by area. So that will be an indicator. Now, sometimes you can create demand by increasing the speed of transport, for instance, in an area. So that might create demand which do not exist if there are no transport. So, it's a give and take, and that's why it's easy to make mistake, because you have to invest and make a guess. When you invest, of course, the money is there, especially if it's a bus, you can always change the line of the bus. If it's a subway, and if it's sewer and water, you cannot remove them and move them somewhere else. So here, there is a very delicate thing for the expansion of the city.
And I think that's some of the conversation we are having at the moment, is that we are already spending 5.5 billion, we all are, on the city rail link, but a lot of the stations or the areas which will benefit from the most have some of the tightest zoning possible in a city. So you're talking about some of those communities who will obviously fear the change that might come, but it will come over a long time. But we're trying to have this kind of argument that more people, deserve to be close to that new infrastructure, but also we want to get the value out of the investment we're doing. So you can think, I don't even have to name the stations because everyone here will probably know them, but at Plan Change 120, it's kind of happening at the same time, or slightly after now, of the City Rail Link opening, which I think will then probably create more demand or more hopeful people wanting to live near them, because suddenly we've created a trip that's 3 times as fast to the city. People's days are shorter because they're able to get to and from a home. But if there's no zoning that allows those homes around, or different types of homes around that infrastructure, it kind of makes you wonder why we did it in the first place.
Can I drag you back to the Greenfields proposition?
Yeah, sure.
There's one in the news this week, which is the Sunfield development that Winton have now got fast-track approval for in Papakura.
Yes.
3,000 homes, something like that?
3,850.
Yeah. The council opposed it, Auckland Transport opposed it, Waka Kotahi Transport Agency opposed it, and the reason, and Watercare opposed it.
Yeah.
And the reasons you all opposed it are that there is nothing there to service those new homes.
Yes.
Undoubtedly, Winton will make attractive homes on relatively cheap land that people will want to live in. And they're talking about making it there's only one road, it's a loop road, so everyone will be riding around on bicycles and it'll be lovely. But we'll all pay for that.
Yes, so it sounds nice. I will just rezone the land and they'll pay for the infrastructure. But there's a lot of caveats throughout the process, even the transport. So it looks like some sort of utopia with no one will drive there. But actually the first 445 households that will live there are allowed to have a car, and they'll provide a field or something for those cars. Mm-hmm. And then when it gets to that 445, because then they'll be able to afford to fund the private EV bus that will go around the suburbs all the time, which will connect with the station, then those people with the cars in the field will have to put their cars, I don't know where, somewhere far away, or not have a car anymore and expect to only use this private vehicle, which I assume the Ratepayers Association of that area, which I'm not sure any of us will have control over, will fund this thing. But then, so it sounds nice, but I'm like, how does that work? And it's not for us to decide it won't work, but it always comes back to us. So both on the stormwater, the wastewater pipes will be built by the developer, but actually the Mangere wastewater treatment plant, where it goes, does not have capacity for the wastewater to come to it, and it won't anytime soon. Which sounds like, with the panel members have sort of said, don't worry, you'll work it out. And maybe we will, but the problem is all of us have to work that out, and we'll be focusing infrastructure there, and the OPEX is never included. So the animal management that will have to go in there, the compliance, the buses that we would inevitably, the local board and the councillor and the mayor of the day will be told, we want buses in there, Auckland Transport ones or Auckland Council ones or whatever we're calling it. So it sounds fine, but actually trying to build a city like that, there are 4 other similar fast tracks in right now on the edge of the city that will keep pushing us to focus in other parts of the city, when so much as a current urban area needs a lot of investment right now.
Ella, is that what you've just heard? Is that something not working the way you would like to see it working?
That's time to say I'm incompetent. It's very complex. I mean, unless there are many issues there, especially when you say the first settler will come with a car, which I think is the right thing to do, but at a certain date they will abandon their car. I'm a little worried about that. I think that if you provide a competitive transport, they will abandon their car, but if the transport is not competitive for, maybe they work somewhere else which is accessible only by car, and they still need their house. So I would like to have a competition between the public transport and the car, and if the public transport is good and is bringing to a lot of jobs, then you will have more people doing that. But to count for them to not, come with a car and then abandon it seems to be a little. But again, I don't know your country enough. Maybe the culture is different from what I know.
We don't care about our cars.
It's not like being anti-development, but it's the fact that this fast track doesn't assume normal process. So a lot of the conditions are like, well, as long as the farmers on the adjacent sites to the development clean their farm drains, it probably won't flood. But if you don't have access to it, then maybe we'll look to something else. There's just a cacophony of things that make this much harder, but then it's easy to point back at the council and go, oh, they just don't want houses. But it's far more complex than that.
Thank you. Richard, you have to go, don't you? Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Turning to a Slido question, Auckland is upzoning aggressively, but the built outcomes are often poor quality. Where does design quality of streets, public spaces, building interfaces fit?
What struck me in New Zealand, I have spent now 1 week in New Zealand, is precisely the high quality of the streets and the sidewalks. So I think that when I look at, again, the way the street space is divided between sidewalk, buses, sometimes bicycle, and cars, I think that a lot of care has been done to that, and certainly if it doesn't work at some intersection or something, I'm sure there is somebody who will look at it and modify it. That's the way things work. So you asked me a question here. I will give New Zealand as an example of good management of street, but I've not been everywhere.
Okay.
But you say construction also.
Yeah. So the question relates to buildings as well as the public spaces.
Yes. Well, you have very high standards.
Okay. So
no, I'm ignorant again. I have not been in. I will have to go with you to the places that you feel are deficient, and then I could give an opinion.
Right. Well,
because so far I will have a very high opinion of.
I think I know who that question came from, and I'll introduce you to him after.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think the point is that, to the extent that we do have well-designed public spaces in the city, it is because of an awful lot of work by planners, designers, and politicians to make that happen.
Absolutely.
And it has been controversial all the way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there is a real. It doesn't happen because the market wants it to happen in the public space.
No, this is precisely my point, is that planners should spend more time on the design of streets and parks and open space, because there is no market indicator there. On the contrary, to spend a lot of time to decide what is the correct size of a bathroom, I don't see the point. So more. I don't know if planners do that here. In most countries, in the US, they do that. The size of bathroom, whether the door open. So I think that again, my very superficial impression is that your public spaces are very well designed. Again, the few hours I spend walking, in the city, but certainly there might be area where it's not.
Another question here: how does climate change influence how you enable planning? Greenfields leads to longer travel times, more emissions, but the market doesn't deal with that, or does it?
Yes, it does. You price transport. You can even price carbon on transport. So the market, if you want to use the market as a signal, you can do it very easily.
It's very difficult in this country, and we're not alone, to use carbon pricing as a signal to anybody, because people object to the price of petrol going up.
Well, then they have the environment they deserve.
Okay. Got it? All right. Harsh but fair. To achieve the outcomes you're describing, what is the best way to structure your local government and the constituencies it holds? I.e., is localism good?
I'm not sure. I mean, there are certain things which has to be solved at the very local level, and other things, I think, which are much better solved at the metropolitan level. I had an example in China many years ago where in the city of Shanghai they had decided to plant trees. Shanghai at the time was 10 million people, so they had a huge administration, and I don't know how many hundred people, or maybe 1,000, were in charge of planting trees and taking care of them and watering them. And in the neighborhood, people were complaining they plant the wrong tree in the wrong place. Sometimes they don't water them, so they die. It's a terrible thing. The city of Shanghai then say, all right, every neighborhood, we will assign 2 or 3 people who are in charge of trees, and you, the neighborhood, they named somebody, you will supervise to see if they water them, if they plant them in the right place, and if it's right. By the way, in China, I found that there were a lot of people who knew a lot about plants and trees, and this worked very well. So you see, the people were paid by the city government, employees, but when they arrive in the neighborhood, where they were under the supervision of the local neighborhood. And then they make sure that the work was done. So I think here this local system is very good. Okay. However, if you say the opposite will be in Stockholm, they did a survey. It was a survey of opinions. It was not a law. Some years ago, saying they took every block and they say, how do you want your street to be used? And they ask the people to vote. All of them say, we want the street to be accessible only to us. We don't want our neighbors to, a privatization of the street. So you see, this type of issue locally is not good, privatization of school. However, maybe the supervision, for instance, maybe also for garbage removal, maybe it's a good idea to have a decent, not people paid by neighborhoods, too complicated, but to have a supervision of the neighborhood on the way garbage removal is a good scale. But to decide how to use the street is not, it should be, if you ask the whole city of Stockholm, do you want all the street to be privatized? They wouldn't say no. But if it's your own street and the other are not privatized, it's fine.
Yeah.
So that's the size. It's the size of democracy.
And it's about how it's done.
Yes.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about a city where the planning regulations are very particular about how you can develop, particularly in the parts of the city where there's character housing, which give the city its reputation, make it beautiful and so on. And those regulations are so strict and have been used by residents and others in the courts to stop any development, almost any development in central and near central areas. And as a consequence, housing is extremely expensive. And I'm thinking, of course, of San Francisco.
Yes.
What do you do? What do we do as a democratic society to get past that?
Well, by the way, usually the classification as heritage is done by a group of experts who put it on a list. And it's probably supported by a number of people who do not want change. But I think that if you have heritage, it should be really decided. You should have criteria about the beauty of the building, the historical value it has. It should not be because the building is old. I have seen, a building once, 3 days ago, I thought it was one of the ugliest buildings I have ever seen. and it was on the list, I was told, and you cannot touch it. And so I thought, well, I think usually you have a high quality of building, so maybe you want to keep a regular building because it's so unique or something like that. But I don't think it's a good idea. I think that you have also a percentage of, if you keep too much housing heritage that you cannot change, then you have no possible evolution. A street, if we have done that in Manhattan in 1900, everybody will live in tenement. There will be no skyscraper, nothing. So you have the city of Paris, for instance, where practically within the city, I would say 80% is heritage. So we live in a museum. However, they do not have any constraint about changing the use. You can have a dentist in the fourth floor of a residential building. You can have, you can transform an office building into housing or housing into office building without too much trouble. But you cannot change the total floor area. And of course, you have, because it's historical, you have obligation of the maintenance of facade and the roof, So the result has been an enormous gentrification of Paris. That means people, when I was a student, neighborhood where you had workers, blue-collar workers, are all now in the suburbs. On the other hand, the state, the entire state, the nation, have subsidized a lot of the maintenance of the historical building in Paris. So everybody is paying a tax. Those buildings are very attractive. The state subsidized cinema, the subsidized opera, subsidized museum, and you have an accumulation there. I think, it's possible if people desire to do it. After all, it's the cost. The cost is many jobs, by the way, are leaving Paris. Paris is losing a lot of jobs. And Paris, inside the municipality, Paris, the network of transport is fantastic. You have practically a subway station every 800 meters. You can go everywhere. But if the jobs are moving out, this subway is not very useful anymore. So you see, that's a consequence of, and we have to look at the consequence of this. If you think it's worth it, the French think that Paris at the time of the Impressionists, France was an important country, so we want to keep it that way. The regulation do exactly that. So we are a democratic country. If you want to have more jobs in Paris, remove the regulation.
Right, thank you. I am aware that we are running over time. We won't run endlessly over time, but maybe just a couple more questions, if that's okay with you. I've heard you say, point out to us that New Zealand's about the same size as Great Britain,
that's right.
But has a tiny population compared with Britain, which we know is true. And you suggested that means that we have plenty of room here for cities to, you don't like the word sprawl, to extend. And that obviously is true. Land isn't a critical issue here the way it is in many places. Yeah. But I would have thought that's also an argument for density, that because we have a relatively small population, our cities need density to make services like public transport efficient.
Yes. Yes.
So you're relatively agnostic on extension and density, aren't you? I mean, you're arguing for both.
I think density should come from the price of land.
Yeah.
There is no reason to have a skyscraper in the middle of nowhere, and you build a skyscraper because land is very expensive, or because you have so many people who want to go there. But
there might be a reason to build apartments or townhouses. I'm thinking of a place, I don't know if you've been to Queenstown, but Queenstown, everybody I'm sure knows, is a town where there's real pressure, there's a complete lack of affordable housing. And what is happening in this area, which is the tourist centre, it's the most beautiful part of the country, it's the #1 tourist centre. What is happening is that there's massive sprawl of single story dwellings through the countryside.
it's extraordinarily inefficient and will mean that no public transport service will be able to work well.
Right,
and I imagine,
density,
etc.
that's
Yeah,
right.
everyone's going to drive. The roads can't cope now. It's a nightmare in the making.
But is this sprawl because of your regulation? Are you allowed to build
They're allowed to do it that way. Well, yes, but it's
are you
easier
allowed
for developers to build single housing.
Well, unless there is demand for apartment in some area, if you want to be closer to the city. I would really review what prevents people from building apartment, because normally if there is an area which is very desirable to be, like Paris, again for this thing, people want to be there.
That's what you talked about before, the hidden demand for townhouses
Yes,
in
that's
Auckland
right.
that was
Yeah,
released by the AUP.
Right, yeah. See, it's possible. Now, it's possible if you have land use regulation, which are so constraining, get a big privilege for single-family house, it's possible that you have very few developers who are specialized in building apartment. And because, the market is, every developer has a niche market. It select a group of a group of they know their client within an income group, and they build what this client expect. And if you prevent apartments from being built because of your land use regulation, when suddenly you want apartment, you won't find maybe a developer who is experienced enough or is interested in it. So that's a bit a problem you have built yourself by restricting the amount of apartment. And if you unrestrict, it may take 10 years before developer realize what is the technique in order to, first, what is the target group? What type of people are interested in apartment? They are not necessarily everybody. So for a developer, you have to do marketing. You cannot just build that and wait see what happens. They have a skin in the game. Contrary of the planner, they are losing money if they go the wrong thing. The planner can design, color his plan and do whatever he wants. It doesn't matter.
There is a concept at the heart of much of your thesis, which is that for the successful economic life of the country, we need cities to be affordable.
Yes, absolutely.
Could you explain that?
Well, I started with the labor market, right? Labor market means that you have people who are creating the wealth of the city. Everything we like about the city, our library, our park, our well-maintained street, our museum, are built on the productivity of the people who work, on the taxpayer money. This labor force is made, you have people entering the labor force every year, which are some just finishing high school, enter the labor force, other after 5 or 6 or 7 years of university, they enter the labor force. Those people are, this labor force is creating the wealth of the city. If you have an affordability problem, and especially the young people who are just graduate, they are very skilled. It's not that they have no skill. They have a lot of skills, but they cannot afford housing. They are going to leave, either for a smaller city where they will be less productive, but where they can afford housing, or even leave New Zealand. And if you look then how your workforce evolve, suddenly you will see that the median age is getting older and older. And I'm not against old people, but we are less productive, let's face it. And no firm will go to a city where the age pyramid is reversed. That means that you have few people entering the labor force and a lot of people retiring. So you will have no more jobs, and suddenly your labor market collapses, and all the things you like about cities are disappearing at the same time.
So do you have, perhaps to finish up here, a piece of advice for us in Auckland about how we make this a more productive, more affordable, and more livable city?
keep doing what you are doing.
Keep doing what we're doing.
No, but don't despair for, it's difficult. And again, no advice, even from very skilled economist or planner, is completely fail-proof. You try, you monitor, you change, you adjust. So keep looking for reform. Do not think you have an optimum city and nothing should change. So keep trying to change the city to reflect again, the need of your citizen, and then don't. It's a long term. You cannot reduce the price of housing within 1 or 2 years. It takes 10 years, and be patient. Monitor what's happening, and you will have a very good city. By world standard, you are still a very good city. I can tell you, but maybe my standards are lower. But I don't.
So there. Thank you, Alan. I want to thank the New Zealand Initiative again, and to Waihanga, the Infrastructure Commission, for bringing you here. And thank you for your talk this evening. It's illuminating, stimulating, challenging, and reinforcing in some good ways too. I think people would agree with that. So I wonder if you could all join with me in thanking Alan in the usual way. And Malcolm Davis is going to come back and do a final karakia. If it's not too much trouble.
Tēnā tātou katoa, I mihi ana ki a koutou, I mihi ana hoki ki a koe, Ariane, mō tō kōrero ki a tātou e tēnei pō. Nō reira, tō whakaaro o ngā mahi, I te ao, he tino pai. So just acknowledging your kōrero this evening and the work that you've been doing for a number of years. I take it you got using pari a lot, so bonjour. And that's the only bit of French I learnt at school. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so in closing, I'm just going to again close off with a hymn. And then we'll do a final karakia for the night. But again, if you're able to stand, please do so. And if you want to stretch yourself before we start to sing, oh yeah, I love that. Oh, open up the lungs. E honore, e karo. Mga rongo ki te whenua Whakaro pai e ki ngā tangata katoa Ake tātou. Kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou riki a hiukaraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga taitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmene. Tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, haumie, uie, tāe ki e. Have a great night, team, and we'll catch you in the next one.